أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ختم الله على قلوبهم وعلى سمعهم وعلى أبصارهم غشاوة ولهم عذاب عظيم. Allah has set a seal on their hearts and their ears, and over their eyes is a covering, and for them is a great punishment. We have been studying the first 17 verses of Surah Al-Baqarah. In our last Holy Quran class, last week, we studied the root of Rishaba. We studied the meaning of Rishaba and different derivatives which are found all across the Holy Quran, which stem from the same root. Today we're going to take the next root, the new unique root which appears in this verse, and that is of the word adab. Before adab, we have this word called wa. Wa means and, lahum means for them, adabun means punishment, and then we have the word adim. But for tonight's class, we will restrict ourselves to the root of adab. The root of adab, according to Imam Faran Rabbani of Isfahan, he says that the word adab actually comes from the root adaba. And in Arabic, we say ma'un azbun, which means sweet water. So azbun has the meaning of sweetness in it. Now the question is, if azbun means sweetness, then how come adab means the complete opposite? Adab means punishment. There is nothing sweet about punishment. This is where Imam Raghib says that different linguists, different scholars who have talked on this subject, they have mentioned that the actual meaning of the word adab, or the actual root of adab, is azb, which means sweetness. And adab is that kind of punishment where the sweetness of life is removed. When life is not sweet for a person, when somebody thinks that it's not worth living anymore, when somebody feels the pain, the absence of comfort is pain. When that's the situation, then the word which is used to describe this situation is adab. Adab, according to the Holy Quran, can be of many, many types. One type of adab is when Allah the Almighty brings another nation that conquers you. This is one type of adab. Another type of adab is when earthquakes come, or when tsunamis come, or when different pestilences or plagues come. They are also a form of adab. Another form of adab which is mentioned in the Holy Quran is that of division, schisms within the community, within the country. The country or the community itself is divided, and that their division becomes a source of punishment for them. And this is also a form of adab. For some people, economic distrust or economic lack of prosperity is another form of adab. So many people in 2008, when the credit crunch happened, when the economy went down, many people who had heavily invested into the economy itself, when the economy tanked, many people committed suicide. Many people left their homes the way they were because they had no money to pay for the debts that they were in. So economic distress and economic imbalance can create a form of adab in people's lives as well. There are different kinds of azab. Some azab come as a Actually, as a matter of fact, Allah the Almighty has mentioned why the azab. And it will be mentioned in one of the verses, inshallah ta'ala, which we will take up momentarily. But since I have a lot of subject matter that I want to cover tonight, I'm going to quickly skim through the explanation part of the word azab. And now we're actually now going to look at different verses where this root appears. The very first verse which I would like to share with everyone, our audience who are sitting here, and those who are watching online. We're going to now look at chapter number 25, Surah Al-Furqan, verse number 54. Chapter 25, verse number 54 is as follows. Before this verse actually, I'll start with one verse above. Allah says, فَلَا تُطِعِ الْكَافِرِينَ وَجَاهِدْهُمْ بِهِ جِهَادًا كَبِيرًا. So obey not the disbelievers and fight against them by means of the Quran, a great fight. وَهُوَ الَّذِي مَرَجَ الْبَحْرَيْنِ هَذَا عَذْبٌ فُرَاتٌ وَهَذَا مِلْحٌ أُجَاجٌ وَجَعَلَ بَيْنَهُمَا بَرْزَخًا وَحِجْرًا مَحْجُورًا. And he it is who has caused the two seas to flow, this palatable and sweet, and that saltish and bitter. And between them he has placed a barrier and a great partition. The verse above talks about the fact that as a believer, do not follow the ways of the disbelievers. Do not obey them in matters of religion. In matters that affect your religion, do not obey them. Then Allah Ta'ala says, وَجَاهِدْهُمْ بِهِ جِهَادًا كَبِيرًا. Nowadays people say that, look, the anti-Muslims have abrogated jihad. They say that anti-Muslims do not believe in jihad, that somehow we have cancelled. Or that Hazrat Masih Maud Islam has cancelled jihad. This is a wrong notion. Nobody has an authority to abrogate a command of the Holy Quran. Commandment of the Holy Quran is Jahidhum bihi jihadan kabira. Wage a holy war through the Quran. What does this mean? How do you wage a war with the Quran? It is by preaching the teachings, taking the teachings of the Quran to the world, and winning their hearts. This, in other words, is called tabligh. Ahmadiyya Muslim community is by any standard, is the utmost community from among the Muslim circles which has taken up the flagship of taking the message of Islam to the four corners of the world. No other community is as organized as the Ahmadiyya Muslim community in the entire Ummah. No other community has put so many resources in the field of tabligh so that the message of Islam can be taken to the farthest corners of the world. Places where people did not know about civilization, for example, the jungles of Amazon or elsewhere. Ahmadi Muslims are going there with the Quran and teaching those people about Islam. So this is what Quran talked about, that wage the war through Quran by preaching the word of God. And this is what we are doing. And Allah says, don't consider this something which petty. Don't consider this that this is something which is small. Allah says this is kabir. Jihad and kabira. It is a big jihad. It is a big striving, big struggle. It's a big thing in the eyes of God the Almighty. Then comes the verse. وَهُوَ الَّذِي مَرَجَ الْبَحْرَيْنِ هَذَا عَذْبٌ فُرَاتٌ وَهَذَا مِلْحٌ أُجَاجٌ. It is He, meaning it is Allah, who has between them He has placed a barrier and a great partition. Now the word azbun has been mentioned here, which stems from the same root as the word adab. And azbun here has been used to denote sweets. Here, two phenomena are being mentioned. Hazrat Khalifatul Masih Sani radiallahu ta'ala anhu, Hazrat Muslim Maud mentions, in his tafsir of the same verse, that when a river meets the sea, the water of the river is sweet wherever you go. This is the natural phenomenon. The water of the river is going to be sweet when you taste it. And it is something which is life-giving. However, the water of the sea is the opposite. It's bitter. And if you drink from it, you will actually become sick. And then Allah Ta'ala says, بَيْنَهُمَا بَرْزَخًا وَحِجْرًا مَهْجُورًا. That between them two is a partition. Even though they meet, yet the sweetness of the water of the river does not affect the bitterness of the sea, nor the bitterness of the sea water affects the sweetness of the river water. Even though these two waters collide with each other, they merge with each other, yet the effect that each of them has, the unique effect, does not affect the other one. This is one meaning. There is another meaning. Hazrat Khalifatul Masih Sani says, the other meaning of this verse is that a believer is like a sweet water, and the disbeliever is like a sea of bitter water. Now, in this world, both of these two have to exist side by side. In a country, believers and non-believers exist side by side. In a city, in a hamlet, in a village, in a small community, they're living next door to each other. They mingle with each other, they deal with each other, but yet the sweetness, the iman, the faith of the believer is not affected one bit by the bitterness or the disbelief of the disbeliever. And vice versa. This does not mean that a believer one day cannot become a disbeliever, or a disbeliever cannot one day become a believer. That's not what is mentioned here. What is actually mentioned here is in terms of belief itself. Belief itself can never be, misunderstood as a disbelief, or vice versa. The distinction between the two is so immense, it's so clear that nobody can confuse belief for a disbelief, or vice versa. Another very interesting point that Hazrat Khalifatul Masih Sani has derived from the same verse has to do with the concept of Dajjal and Yajuj and Majuj. We have already studied about Yajuj and Majuj in our previous classes, where I had mentioned about these two concepts, especially during the month of Ramadan. Now, the word Yajuj and Majuj, both of them, the word Yajuj actually comes from the root, same root as Ujaj. Now the word Ujaj and the word Yajuj are coming from the same root. In other words, Allah the Almighty is hinting that look, you would have to live in the West with people who are considered as the Yajuj and the Majuj, or the Dajjal. And yet, you have to make sure that you are not affected by them, that you do not follow them, that you do not obey them when it comes to the matter of religion. In worldly terms, we live together, and there is no discord. We have equal rights, they have equal rights. In terms of religion, if they leave an impress upon us, then that is going to have a negative effect on our spirituality, on our religion itself. This is something which Allah the Almighty says, be aware of that. I would like to quote an example here. Recently, I have been doing some house visits, and one of the things that came across my observation was that somebody told me that why is it that in our Jamaat we do not take any kind of monetary donations from those individuals who work in the business of selling or producing or serving alcohol or pork, so on and so forth. Why do we not take chanda from those individuals? And then the follow-up question to this was that this makes us look like extremists living in the West. That everybody, even other Muslims to an extent, are involved in selling of alcohol products and pork-related products. Yet when any Muslims say that we live in the West and we're the true Muslims, but then at the same time
we consider ourselves in a way liberal, but then we don't accept chanda and we put restrictions on those people who are working in such businesses. The person was insinuating that, look, this is going to make us look like extremists. So maybe perhaps we should take chanda from such individuals, was the point. This is exactly what is being mentioned as a warning in this verse of the Holy Quran. That when you live in the West, the Western society will try to have an impact upon you. The Yajuj and the Majuj and the way of their living will have an effect on you. But do not be affected by it. The purpose of Hazrat Masih Maud was to come and create that distinction between us and the others. If we are going to be merging into that bitter sea, then in the first place we never belonged in this sweet river water, which is known as empty. If we belong to Ahmadiyya, then we have to make sure that we do not merge into the bitter sea of disbelief or so-called westernization. Not everything about westernization is bad. But the things that are bad about westernization, we should not be adopting them. Such as drinking, dancing, consumption of pork-related products, dating, and many other problems that come with the Western culture. So just because we are living in the West doesn't mean that we have to take these negative things from this culture as well, or from this society. If anything, we should be giving the positive things from our teachings to these cultures and societies. Now the next verse which I wanted to share tonight is taken from chapter number 8, verse number 34. Chapter number 8 is Surah Al-Anfal, and verse number 34 is as follows. Allah Ta'ala says, وَمَا كَانَ اللَّهُ لِيُعَذِّبَهُمْ وَأَنْتَ فِيهِمْ وَمَا كَانَ اللَّهُ مُعَذِّبَهُمْ وَهُمْ يَسْتَغْفِرُونَ. But Allah would not punish them while you were among them, and Allah would not punish them while they sought forgiveness. Here the word yu'adhibahum is mentioned, and then mu'adhibahum is mentioned. وَمَا كَانَ اللَّهُ لِيُعَذِّبَهُمْ, and Allah was not going to punish them. Yu'adhibahum, He was going to punish them. And وَمَا كَانَ اللَّهُ مُعَذِّبَهُم means, and Allah is not the one who will punish them. وَهُمْ يَسْتَغْفِرُونَ, while they are seeking God's forgiveness. This verse talks about Holy Prophet ﷺ's life. When he was in Makkah, the disbelievers used to say that, oh Allah, if what Holy Prophet ﷺ is saying to be true, then rain down punishment upon us. Here is the answer. Why the punishment from Allah did not descend on the Meccans while the Holy Prophet ﷺ was still in Makkah. The reason was that Holy Prophet ﷺ was among the Meccans. And this was the reason why Allah the Almighty did not punish the Meccans at that time. And when Holy Prophet ﷺ was in a way forced to go into exile, to migrate to Medina, now the Holy Prophet ﷺ was not in Makkah anymore. And now Allah the Almighty says, in the very next verse, وَمَا لَهُمْ أَلَّا يُعَذِّبَهُمُ اللَّهُ. And what excuse have they now that Allah should not punish them? As long as Holy Prophet ﷺ was living among them, Allah did not punish the Meccans. But when they forced Holy Prophet ﷺ to leave Makkah, when he was gone from Makkah, now Makkah was left unprotected. Now the punishment from Allah was going to come. And it did come. And the very first installment of that punishment came in the form of the Battle of Badr, where the strongest of them, the leaders of the Meccans, were killed in that battle, which was a form of punishment. You better take a look. It'll take us just 30 seconds or so to change the batteries. Sorry about that, the batteries ran out. I was mentioning that as long as Holy Prophet ﷺ lived among the Meccans were not punished. And the moment Holy Prophet ﷺ was made to go into exile, now the Meccans were left unprotected. And then the punishment from Allah came. But here's another thing that Allah the Almighty is mentioning. Allah does not punish a people as long as they are seeking God's forgiveness. When two things happen, when people who belong to God, when they migrate from that country, and the people of that country are not seeking God's forgiveness, what happens next is that the punishment from Allah comes down. Slowly, the country that I have called my home, Pakistan, has been forcing the Ahmadi Muslims into exile. When you make the circle of life tighter, when you make things difficult for the residents, the citizens of Pakistan, who are also Ahmadi Muslims, a time will come when they are forced to leave that country, when they are forced to migrate away, until nobody is left over there. And when that happens, then the punishment from Allah comes. Because we believe that Ahmadi Muslims are the true Muslims who are seeking God's forgiveness, wherever they are. So if the Pakistan's government or if the Pakistani clerics do not abstain from persecuting the Ahmadi Muslims, and they keep on forcing the Ahmadi Muslims to migrate away, and if the Ahmadi Muslims leave, then the punishment from Allah will overtake these clerics who are leading the masses astray. May Allah the Almighty have mercy on Pakistan and its residents. One last verse that I wanted to share tonight is taken from chapter 17, verse number 16. Chapter 17 of the Holy Quran is Surah Bani Israel, and verse number 16 is as follows. من اهتدى فإنما يهتدي لنفسه ومن ضل فإنما يضل عليها ولا تزر وازرة وزر أخرى وما كنا معذبين حتى نبعث رسولا. He who follows the right way follows it only for the good of his own soul, and he who goes astray only to his own loss, and no bearer of burden shall bear the burden of another. وَمَا كُنَّا مُعَذِّبِينَ حَتَّى نَبْعَثَ رَسُولًا. We never punish until we have sent a messenger. We never punish until we have sent a messenger. A few years ago, there were floods and earthquakes that hit Pakistan in a very extreme manner. Thousands of people lost their lives, and as a result, people were saying that this is a divine punishment, that this isn't something normal. These things were happening back to back. And the Pakistani newspapers were publishing the headlines that people were saying that this is divine wrath, this is divine punishment, that this is an azab from Allah the Almighty. Some clerics went on and they said that, look, don't say that this is an azab, otherwise the Ahmadis will come running and say that, look, what you're saying is proving our point. It isn't our point, it is the point of the Holy Quran. Allah Ta'ala says that punishment does not come upon a people until a messenger has been sent among them and he has been rejected, ridiculed and persecuted. This is the case with the Meccans. When the Meccans were punished, when the Quraysh were punished, the Nabi, the Prophet, the Messenger of Allah the Almighty had come among them. He had been persecuted, rejected and ridiculed. And then came the punishment. So if now the Muslim Ummah is being punished in one way or another, if the Pakistani people are suffering through or going through an azab from Allah the Almighty, then they need to think really, really hard. Could it not be so that Allah has actually sent a messenger of His? When the bubonic plague hit the province of Punjab in pre-partition India, hundreds of thousands of people lost their lives in Punjab and elsewhere in the entire country. And people were uttering these words that this is God's punishment. At that time, promised Messiah ﷺ made the same announcement. That open your eyes and look around. Could it not be that Allah has actually sent a messenger of His who has warned you and you did not heed His warning? You did not pay any heed. And now, as a result of His rejection and you persecuting Him and His followers, now this punishment is coming forth. So this is the phenomena that Allah the Almighty talks about in the Holy Quran. And the verse that I just quoted, the word that Allah has used is mu'adhibeen. Mu'adhib means one who punishes. Mu'adhibeen is the plural of it. When you say mu'adhib with a kasra under zal, it means one who sends the punishment. And if you say mu'adhab with a fatha or zabar on top of zal, then it means one who is punished. So the verse is وَمَا كُنَّا مُعَذِّبِينَ, and we are not those who punish people حَتَّى نَبَسَ رَسُولًا, until we have sent our messenger. Inshallah ta'ala, we'll continue the verse of Surah Al-Baqarah that we are covering in our next class. Inshallah ta'ala. Wa akhiru da'wana and alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. If anybody has any question related to what we just discussed tonight, go ahead and ask.
What was it mean? You said there's a kasra, what does it mean by it? Can you repeat that?
Mu'adhib, when we say mu'adhib instead of mu'adhab, mu'adhib means one who punishes, mu'adhab means one who is punished. Yes, sir.
So when azab comes, some good people also, they may also end up.
Yes.
And why this is called an azab?
Why is azab called azab if good people die? Whenever a catastrophe or a punishment comes, it's always a punishment for those who do wrong. It's not an azab for good people. For example, the bubonic plague. In the hadith it is meant, Hazrat Masih Maud received ilham that as a punishment, the bubonic plague is going to affect the disbelievers, those who rejected Masih Islam's message. But then he also said that it is possible that some believers, albeit in a very small quantity, very small number, but they might also die as a result of this bubonic plague. In the hadith it is mentioned, if a disbeliever dies of bubonic plague, it is punishment. But if a believer dies as a result of it, then it would be considered as a shahadat. So when a believer dies, but the thing to remember is, the majority of believers, if they die as a result of something which is normally considered as a punishment, then you cannot call it shahadat. Then the chances are those people weren't believers to begin with. And that's why the punishment overtook them in greater numbers. Even at the time of Hazrat Masih Maud Islam, Hazrat Masih Maud Islam wrote, when he wrote this book, Kishti-e-Nuh, he made this announcement. He said, look, just because you belong to my community doesn't mean that you're going to be saved. He said, only those people will be saved who are part of Ad-Dar, who are part of my home. Meaning they are so well enthused, they are so much immersed in Ahmadiyyat as if they live within the household of Hazrat Masih Maud Islam. So someone of a very high caliber of faith will be protected. Someone of a weak iman isn't necessarily going to be protected. And as a side precaution, Hazrat Masih Maud Islam then told those followers of his who were weak in faith that you should also get the inoculation done, the vaccination done. This tells us that it is possible for the believers to also die from something which is considered as a punishment for other people, but the believers will never die in greater numbers. If the believers start to die as a greater number, then they cannot be considered as, then according to what we know, there is something wrong with their belief. This is why we do not say that believers can die as a result of divine punishment in greater numbers. One last thing, and then I will end tonight's discourse, is that whenever punishments come from Allah the Almighty, this is something that we need to keep in mind. Whenever punishment from Allah the Almighty comes, three groups are affected, one way or another. And these are the three groups in which humanity is divided. One is the group of disbelievers who reject the Prophet of God. The other is the group of believers who accept the Prophet of God. And then the other group is in between. They do not reject the Prophet of God, but they haven't accepted him yet. And many people fall under this category who have not rejected the Prophet of God, but they haven't accepted him either. When the punishment from Allah the Almighty comes, the first group, which is the group of disbelievers, is affected greatly. The middle group, the group which is certain, they're neither here nor there. They haven't accepted the Prophet, but they haven't rejected him outright either. They're also affected. But the group of the believers, they are not affected by it, the way the other two groups are. Why is that? The reason is, when the punishment from Allah comes, it comes to create a distinction between the believers and everybody else. Between the believers and everybody else. This is why it's very important that when we go to preach to people, we say to them that, look, Allah has sent His messenger, His prophet for this day and age, Hazrat Masih Maud, accept him. Because when punishment comes from God the Almighty, who is spared? Those who have accepted him. Those who are still in the state of limbo, they will not be spared from the punishment. So, this is one point that I wanted to make sure that I get across, that everybody is clear on this. Inshallah ta'ala, any more questions that we have on this subject, I'll inshallah ta'ala entertain them and try to answer them in our next Holy Quran class. Inshallah ta'ala. Would somebody like to call here now?